Good afternoon. This is journal number 9, Keith Gaw. Um, the assignment was to let me know what your definition of domestic terrorism is. And I went back into chapter 1 and read my uh, definition of terrorism. And that read my personal definition of terrorism is any human being that causes harm, damage, or terror to another person, place, or thing. The reason for this terror or harm can be a number of different things: political gain, religious beliefs, financial gain, any type of power gain or control. And then I went to the internet and looked up the domestic terrorism, and you could just add domestic terrorism definition onto the end of that, my definition of terrorism: the committing of terrorist acts in the perpetrator's own country against their fellow citizens. Domestic terrorism plagued the country during a time of high political tensions. So that is my definition. Um, the only difference between terrorism and domestic terrorism is domestic is in the own your own country, and other terrorism is abroad, international terrorism or other types. Um, Explain why you think our biggest domestic terrorism threat is coming from the violent far right. I did some research on this and found a really unique article from the New York Post, which I usually don't follow these because uh, these tend to favor one side. But however, I felt like this was pretty nonpartisan. It states the the title of it was "Far Right Groups Are Behind Most U.S. Terrorist Attacks," reports finds. It says the think tank researchers found that the threats of violence were linked in part to this year's mass protests and confrontations with protesters from a variety of factions. The report said that far left and far right violence was deeply intertwined, and that far left groups, including anarchist and anti-fascist organizations, were responsible for 12 attacks and plots so far this year, or 20% of the total number, up from 8% in 2019. It goes on to say part of the issue we're seeing is with people congregating, whether it's for protests or other issues, in cities. It has basically brought together extremist individuals on all sides in close proximity. And that's, um, I agree with that. Um, it said, we've seen people on all sides armed, and it does raise concerns about escalation in, of violence in U.S. cities. The report also linked the threat of violence to the country's charged politics, the coronavirus pandemic, and its financial fallout. It warned that violence could rise after the presidential election because of increasing polarization, growing economic challenges, concerns about racial injustice, and the persistence of coronavirus health risks. Um, so that's me explaining. Actually, I did research on it and me reading out and I totally agree with this New York Post on that subject. It says, see if you can link your thoughts to the facts that 67 of domestic terrorism attacks and plots are coming from the far right. Remember, no right or wrong answer. Um, I don't have a good answer for that, except for that we're having these large congregations in the same area where you get people clashing, and I believe the far right has um, far right extremists have um, the capabilities of, or not capabilities, but they choose to own a lot of guns. They choose to be very extreme. So anytime that guns are involved with people that are far right, then I think that's what's going to happen when you get these groups together. So I feel like I'm rambling today, but it's been one of those weeks. It's Friday, and enjoying the class so far. Thanks.